It's an absolute honor to be on the Wisdom Seeker Society. I just heard great things about it, so I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is our theme in the Wisdom Seekers every September is around being heard. And we had such a lovely chat a couple of, I don't, time is an illusion, but I think it was last week or the week before. I'm very honored to have you on this journey with me. Thank you.
No problem. Destiny awaits, like I was saying, because I feel the things I heard were just incredible about your approach. And you're saying, yeah, it's about being heard, but not just hearing noise, but hearing wisdom. Like there's a difference between these two types of hearing and what we're perceiving, right? So I
Yeah.
feel like separating the static from the signal is part of knowing and defining, uh, what it is that makes life good, in terms of not just your beingness in the world, but your thinkingness too. And in the spiritual world, we call that spirit, and then pure being, or the transcendental being that imbues everything here in the created world with meaning, really deep meaning that leads to synchronicities, that leads to our hopes and dreams coming true. We just had a pretty big breakthrough even yesterday on how to allow people to be heard. So as you know, I'm a bit of a wild child, a little bit out there right now. Normally, I don't look like this. If you go to all my other interviews and stuff, I'm pretty clean shaven. This is a bit of an appearance. And originally, it was a safety thing because I was going on hunger strikes outside in the wintertime here in Canada. And so I thought I better start protecting my face because I was out there for weeks. Like I think my one hunger strike was 4 weeks long. And the good news, though, is if you're healthy and you take care of your body, you can actually last that long with no problems, as long as you
Yeah.
drink water and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So the beard is because of this. And I also wanted to sort of have the homeless um, feel heard by identifying with the movement, sort of like how Gandhi dressed in the Dalit clothing, the
Yeah.
low-class clothing, because he represented the lowest side of society, that you don't judge a society by how you treat its wealthy, you
Yeah.
judge it by how it treats its poor. And
Hmm.
so if I don't look poor, a little bit shaggy, well, I'm not doing my job, I suppose. I got my low budget like production in the background, got some love protecting me. So that's the context that this is happening in. Uh, and there's I think there's a lot of good people behind this approach. So this approach is very simple.
Mm.
And I think last time we talked, we both understood that this new kind of knowledge, this new kind of relationship to things is actually simpler than the hodgepodge of abstraction and the mess that we have currently in the information explosion.
Yeah.
And,
Definitely.
I bet you everybody in the crowd, if we had one, would raise their hand and say, yeah, they're probably feeling anxiety with how fast things are going and how much
Yeah.
is happening. So I feel like the approach has to be simpler than what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And luckily it is. It's almost too simple because people are like, this won't change the world, will it? And, no more suspense, a cliffhanger here, but it's really about tracking time. In order to be heard properly, you have to be given the right amount of time to be heard.
Mm.
That sounds obvious, right?
Yeah.
But there's a special nature to time. There's true time, the present time,
Hmm.
deep time, synchronistic time,
Mm.
where everything makes sense time, beautiful time. And then there's what we're experiencing today, which is linear time, chopped up time, time that disappears. You're not even present enough in the time to enjoy that it's happening to you. We're all wrapped up. And so this kind of time is what I think is not just causing people to not be heard, but I think is actually in some ways killing us and our entire species and our planet and everything. And this is not an exaggeration. If you go to the experts, they're all starting to panic a little bit.
Mm.
And it's really because at the heart of the crisis, we can't cooperate to even solve those problems. So it comes down to hearing again, that when they try to listen to each other across these nuclear divides, we call them, these
Mm.
nuclear dialectics, um, instead of hearing the thing that connects them so that they can cooperate, they see the thing that divides them, the limit.
Yeah.
But there's a paradoxical nature to the limit,
Mm.
where, yeah, it does separate and it creates distinctions, but it also connects opposites. So
Mm.
that is hard for us to see if we're not in the inner consciousness that recognizes pure time or eternal time or the present.
Mm.
So that's a little bit of, I guess, more context to hopefully show that the simplicity is really powerful.
Yeah,
Right. And
definitely.
that's where wisdom comes in, I think.
Yeah,
So
I mean, time is a thing, that man-made thing. It's a concept that we created to connect us in space, I suppose, or to find a connection point in space. But it is also disconnecting us, in that we create so much fear around it. How productive are we? How much are we getting done within time, and all those elements, taking us out of this deeper presence of connection, which is where the beauty lies, and where connection lies, I think.
in our moment of being heard,
Mm.
I'm sandwiching this between a bunch of stuff, and so are you. And
Yeah.
we're experiencing it right now. Man-made linear time is like putting a restriction on our time here, and it's getting tighter and tighter. Each time I talk to somebody, it's like we're spiraling now, and that's a symptom of also this is going to be kind of intense. Pre-psychotic terror, right? Like that escalates quickly. But if you start to get this loss of time, like things start to speed up
Yeah.
and you feel more and more out of control, the amygdala starts to really activate, and your animal impulses start to, like, you're just looking around like what's coming.
Mm.
So I feel like our species is starting to get into that mode, and artificial intelligence might not seem to connect to this, but it's a strange amplification that's going to occur that we're not prepared for. That's going to cause what they call, the experts are literally calling it reality collapse, which of course we know a loss of reality is psychosis. So we're
Yeah.
heading towards this psychosis, I guess, in the psychiatric industry. I was going to call it psychiatric field. It's turning into an industry. Um, let's make more illness to get more money.
Yeah.
It's starting to really go in that direction where it's like compounding on itself, and time is in some sense compressing in the wrong way, like we're running out of time. So I'm trying to convince people, and convincing is an external, I'm trying to inspire people that if they're attached to the dead form of time, they're contributing to the problem, and we need to go over to this infinite time where it's simpler and counterintuitive, but it requires listening and being heard on a new level in a new way that I think compresses time, but it compresses time into flow states rather than into anxiety.
Yeah, and we have a choice in that, so we can choose which way we want to go. The external sources, I would call it, maybe, is going to push us into chasing the buck in the clock time, or whatever we want to call it. But we do have a choice to remove ourselves from that in spaces, in bits, so that we can get used to that in the flow state, in creation, in creativity, in expression, in really connecting to ourselves. And I think that's where being heard starts. How do I express myself? And in that act, I can absorb better what you are expressing.
In your exactly.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned clock time, because the approach to solving man-made time is to use clocks, but in a way that it looks on the outside normal. It's kind of like, this is too simple, and you're doing the same thing. Isn't the United States Senate and the Congress using timers and all this? But it's really the wakefulness of it. And beingness is kind of like a state. It's like a space. It's kind of like static and solid. It's a noun, right? You have an entity that is beingness. People don't normally think of beingness as a doing. It's like, oh, being is a state, not a doing. Doing is an action. Doing is your thoughts. Doing is in your head. But if you look at the grammar of it, being is actually a gerund, which is simultaneously a verb and a noun together. So we get to choose in our consciousness what that word means to us in any context, which is why it's really misunderstood. But I really think you're hitting on it, that in terms of creating a space, technically being a space, creating a space that gets us back in touch with true time, eternal time. I think that we have to use timers, and as training wheels. We have to put training wheels back on to get us out of the dead way of communicating and back into that spacious way. And it sounds like, okay, well, if you put a timer on something, it just makes you feel panicky. Like as soon as,
Exactly what I was thinking.
especially like neurodivergent individuals and like, artists really like, it's like you see the numbers counting down and you automatically think I'm in linear time. I can't think about what I need to think about. I'm not thinking about what I have to share. I'm thinking about what the time wants me to share.
Yeah.
But there's a happy medium here we're finding. So really it's relative to, IQ is just a distribution on current norms.
What is normal? Normal is a setting on the dryer for me. We are, in comparison, we are creating disconnect. So yes, disability if we want to do this thing, but if we want to do this thing, then what is a disability? I struggle with that concept of it's only a disability if the environment isn't what is conducive to the person's superpowers, because there are many superpowers within the disability community, or disabled, which they aren't. It's like saying a dyslexic is disabled, which they definitely aren't, because they have this ability to have a three-dimensional view on problem solving, which the normal person doesn't have. But just because they can't decipher the codes that we've now agreed to use as exchanging information, now we're going to classify them as being disabled, which I think is so counterintuitive to moving or to us as humans, as beings, as collaborative creative creatures. It's very difficult for me to put those together, because that's what the system, as Michael would also talk about the system relevance in the system, that's where those people or us will never fit in, because we are not
System relevant. Yeah, exactly. He says a lot, and it's smart. And Michael, like we didn't think that this approach of being heard was going to work for him.
Yeah.
But it did. That's the counterintuitive thing. We're like, oh, even he liked it. And what happened was he says, conversations are superpowers. Like, is a superpower of humans. And I really feel like the sorting mechanism, the schooling system we have sorts for linear IQ. And then if you don't do well there, then you get sorted to the bottom. You get a crushing experience. Like I know dyslexics that are like in the oil patch and they're sitting out there just grinding with manual labor when they might actually be the ones that are supposed to be looking in that 3D way and hire human problems. And the reason why, and the fact that we're spiraling out of control is because they're not up there working their magic. Like Michael's not up there saying, hey, there's a different type of intelligence here that's non-linear. If we're going to get out of this downward spiral we're in, we have to change the standard by which we measure people. Like, yes, reading is important, right? But that's not everything. There's something else that's happening in consciousness that's causing dyslexia that might be a bigger opening that we haven't figured out how to merge these two worlds, because these people are so up in this extra space and we're trying to linearize it. So I feel this.
And often with dyslexics or people that are not system relevant or fitting into the system, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a lower IQ. Most often, and I've done hundreds of intelligence or cognitive assessments, this was my work was as a psychological assessment. Often those are the higher IQs, 130 up. But there's a processing, slower processing speed or lower working memory, because they are processing so much more, not because they are slower in their processing, but because they are taking so many more connection points into consideration, which often gets lost in that system view as to, oh, okay, they are not as good as, but actually they are better than.
It's opposite than what we think. Our world is inverted, like we're backwards in lots of ways. And what's profound about that is, in terms of the current level of wisdom or the current sources of wisdom that I've been accessing here and trying to infuse into this being heard in what we're calling ever living meetings, that are working even for Michael here with these timers, is that the nature of reality itself is this flip-floppy dialecticalness where opposites are constantly flipping, and it's the
Mm.
wholeness, that the context that tells you how to interpret something that can be interpreted coherently in two completely opposite ways. And I
Yeah.
think dyslexics are doing that. Is that
Yeah.
actually they're so deep, they're starting to get into that the fabric of reality itself. Like, what is perception? What is language? And they're seeing the grammar have this speculative nature to it,
Yeah.
where it's like you're choosing the meaning of it, right? What's the rigidity that's telling me what these words mean? And if the context isn't clear, you end up in this like superposition almost. And the
Exactly.
Buddha, all the gurus are talking about it. Jesus, Prophet Muhammad, like they all focus on, hey, you can interpret it this way, and the silver lining is this way. And they're not just happening alternatingly; they're also happening simultaneously too, in a negative way and in a positive way. And I
Yeah.
feel like you're right. It's like the higher ups are actually the people who are more gifted in that kind of cognition they're being like almost like drugged by language. We have physical drugs too. We're like drugging our psychotic individuals who are like really tapping into a different type of time. We're drugging them physically with injections. And then
Yeah.
we're drugging our kids with language to really
Mhm.
trying to harness in that linear thinking. And I feel like there's a way out of this now, because I think we've made a breakthrough in terms of what wisdom really is and how to listen to it in a safe, Michael and I were talking about a safe enough space, because if it's too safe, you can get helicopter pilot type of stuff happening, and it actually restricts growth
Yeah.
in terms of agency and self-development and dignity.
Hmm.
So a safe enough space to give people the time and the spaciousness to be heard,
Mm.
and clarifying that your weaknesses might be a limit that's connecting you to something bigger. And then that really amplifies the authenticity to have people come out in their true diversity and say the stuff that they know other people will think is weird, but might actually be the key to the puzzle that is missing, especially in the global context.
Yeah.
I really feel like, okay, how do you get these speculative thinkers into this what's called universal logic, this deeper wisdom now, so that they can set the context, and it might actually help cure what we think is pathological behaviors or unhelpful disabilities or whatever. It might
Mm.
help clarify, oh, this is what this dyslexic mind is doing. This is what the psychotic mind is doing. This is what the low IQ mind is doing too. All
Mhm.
these types of measures, we show their limit with this universal logic to say, well, that's actually only one side. Here's the other side. And then everybody starts breaking out of that dualistic consciousness and into that non-duality, which embraces the duality within itself.
Mm. Because everything is a process. And as long as we have a process, there's evolvement. And in evolvement, there will always be contradiction because we will have movement.
Are you blending involvement and evolving together?
Yes.
Wow, okay. I love that actually. That's what we're trying to do with these ever living meetings that we piloted just yesterday. We had our best one. We call them main rehearsals, because we're
Yeah.
planning to hyper customize the outreach. We're trying to inspire people to get out of this dead wave measuring things and get
Mm.
into this new living way. And really, people are stuck. Like, once you get into a linear frame, it's rigid, right?
Mm.
It holds you there. It's almost neurotic if you can't think outside of it.
Yeah, because it becomes a safety net, because this is the only thing I can hold on to. It's that one of my favorite words, which is now also not going to get to me now, cognitive dissonance. As soon as I let go of this little bit, that is my structure, that is my linearity, then nothing else that I believe is true anymore, or possibly isn't true anymore. Yeah,
And
which
that's
is a scary place
exactly.
for
People
me.
don't want to, they won't leave what they're, even if they know something is wrong in their belief system or their identities, they won't leave it unless there's something to jump into. Very few people can do the running leap into something that they have no idea about, unless they have a lot of privilege and a lot of strength, then they can sometimes take it.
Or they have had trauma and have worked through a lot of stuff, and they
Yeah.
are able to realize that I am, the self is maybe not even real. There is no certainty, and there is the unknown is my friend, because that's where I can touch other things. There's more than just this perception that I have, possibly.
Yeah. Guru consciousness. That's right. That deeper perception.
Yeah.
How do we get a lot of people there in a very short amount of time is what I'm wondering. It's like, okay, a lot of humanity is not in that mode, that we're traumatized, anxiety is increasing, suicide is increasing, everything is increasing and faster and not linear, exponentially increasing. So this approach has to really inspire people to want to make the transition. Like, it's an inwardness. It can't just be an external forcing, because that could increase the trauma.
Yeah.
It's got to be something that we all do together. We somehow trigger that divinity inside and then have it come out and resonate with the external, this new way of life. And that's what this space is supposed to be. It's supposed to be an ever livingness where it's like, it's always refreshing itself, because we invite in the unknown in the right amount of time. And the unknown is actually also a version of time, because being is a knowingness. And the time is the process of developing that knowingness and that evolution type of developing. So how do you do that without stressing people out more, especially when we're so diverse now? Like, humanity is hyper connected in the external way, not the internal.
Can I ask you a question before you go into that, as to why do you want to do that? Why do you want it? Isn't it an inherent process that would happen? We will attract each other, in essence. Why do you think it's necessary for us to create it, if that makes sense?
It's kind of like it's like that dualistic mode again. It's like, in one sense, we are automatically in our beingness doing it. And actually, spirit is doing it through us, even when
Yeah.
we're not conscious. It's been actualizing through human history for,
Yeah.
since it began. So there's that side of the equation. But if that was all that there was to truth, then why do we have thought? Why do we have thinking, where we can diverge from our impulses? We can see our impulses and then look at them from outside and be like, do I really want to do that? Or do I have a different option? And that meta reflection is what allows human beings to be different from plants, animals, as far as we know.
We think we are different from them in that, because that we don't understand, maybe, according to me, or I think that we don't know anything really. Most of what we base our thoughts on is assumptions, and that can change at any minute or any second, really.
Yeah, I'm not totally I'm anthropocentric in one way and anthropocentric not in another way, where maybe octopuses or dolphins could be having metacognition, but for sure human beings are, to some degree. And then you can have meta reflection on meta reflection on meta reflection, which we call enlightenment.
Yeah.
But it's true. There's dual nature of things. It's like there's like an aligned way and an unaligned way of things everywhere, which can make them good or bad. But even the standard is itself moving, except for eternal standards, which is an important thing to talk about, which we can. But it's a big conversation where it requires some context, which is why I'm explaining all this, because it sounds out there, right? It's like, but in order to break into eternal truths, you have to listen in a new way to the universe itself and what the fabric is saying. So that means that the beingness and the thinkingness need to align in a special way that is universal. And in order to create spaces that are conducive to that, we have to embrace the feeling and the intuitive and the being, but we also have to embrace the thinking, the discursive, and the analytical. And if these aren't in alignment, then you start getting the abstractions where, okay, the intuition is bad and it actually leads to feelings that are impulsive, and there's a bunch of limitations in beingness, but there's also limitations in thinkingness too, where you can overanalyze, overthinking, you have decision paralysis and all that. So it's it's not like it's either or, it's like the right combination. It's like the right mixing of them is what unlocks the magic in that Goldilocks zone where flow state happens, right? It's like that's that sweet spot of enough challenge to stimulate you, but not so much challenge that you're in arousal or anxiety or worry or things that literally cause you to be less productive. But productive, not in the linear sense. We want to be productive in that non-linear sense of self-growth. So I feel like that's why, for me, I think that we have this automaticness of divine will and divine impulse, but we also have this divine freedom, this absolute radical creativity, that you have the choice whether or not to align with those impulses or clarify them. And we have to align that capricious abstract freedom, that negative freedom, with this sort of necessity to have actual freedom as destiny, a choosing of what we already are in our essence, our deeper ideal self in potentia. So that's why I feel, does that answer your question about both?
A little bit, and I think it's still a natural process. I think it will still happen, but because you have introduced time as an element, you want to move it forward. If I'm not mistaken. So for me, time is the element that makes you want to create it instead of letting it become.
No, it's both. So that was a dualistic perspective because it's one or it's got to be one or the other. And for me, it's both now. It's going to be an automatic, natural process.
Yeah.
And the thing that I'm trying to introduce now is that there's also a version of thinking that's the same naturalness. That's a universal logic. That's if you can make it if you can make it clear in your conscious mind and not just in your subconscious mind where it's already in soulfulness, because that's already there. If you can make it conscious for your thinking, then the categories that the finite categories that we're using to parse reality are in some sense finite but genuinely infinite in that alignment process.
Yeah.
So for me, it's going to be a naturalness that we have to return to, ironically, because we are broken from it.
Yeah.
So that's the irony, is that we actually have to do less to get there. We have to actually forget something, or forget some abstractions to get back into the remembering of what we already were. But the reason why that moment happens in the first place is because that experience is necessary to have knowledge of what you are. If you just are immersed in yourself and automatically being it, then you're sort of like already like godliness that already knows itself. The hard thing is to get out of yourself to reflect back. So even if God or spirit or the source is perfect in itself, it's not external to itself.
No.
So that's what we are. We are the radical breaking of that so that we can have the experience of returning to that natural flow. So we experience it on a higher level of beauty and just experience. So that's the point, is really just to be here now to experience beauty of what we already are.
Which is the beautiful paradox of life, isn't it? And it is also what wisdom is in essence, because wisdom has got these two sides. It's got the phronesis, which for me is the masculine, the animus, the anima. And then we have Sophia, which is the absolute kind of wisdom, universal wisdom, which is the feminine. And what brings us back to philosophy, which is the philosophia, which is the love of wisdom. But the two needs to, so it's the knowledge, the practical with the intuition, instinct that, complement each other by being free of each other together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's the synthesis. It's where the masculine and the feminine come together in a new way, that they're like simultaneously happening, where the love of knowledge becomes a knowing of wisdom as love. That's what it looks like. And that's what we're trying to get to as, whoa, we've crossed over into this true naturalness, like the true laws that are governing even the universe. The natural laws have a nature themselves. And natures of things, it's a weird thing. Natures is a wakefulness. You might not know the particular object, but you might know the nature of a species or nature of a genus or nature of a kind. And that nature is a universal. It permeates all the particulars. And if you get in touch with the nature of nature, you get into the metaphysical nature, which is simultaneously an automatic spontaneousness of self-creation. Sounds a little bit strange, but it's a universal that's generating itself as a nature in nature, and that thing can be eternal. And we've proven it. We've actually gotten human cognition back into perfect alignment and transmuting faith or uncertainty in it with actual direct 100% self-knowing connection, that you're it, and it can't be any other way. That's like mother's intuition, right? It's like it's like your kids are, how do you know that, mom? I just know. I know. It's like, yeah, you have that feeling. Now that's what universal logic starts to feel like. It's the male and the female happening simultaneously in the universal that feels timeless. And that's why it's a great space opener, because it is universal. It invites in everybody, no matter what dualistic opposition mode identity that they're in. It really creates that vast expansive context for everybody to be in. And then it shows the wakefulness of the nature of how human beings were supposed to meet with each other, so they can get that nature heard no matter what the particular expression is. And so that's where the magic starts to happen, where time is also part of that radical freedom. We're choosing to have like linear time so that we can have this kind of separateness to return to infinite time in the linear time. So it makes linear time beautiful, even though it's limited, because it's in its right wakefulness, that its right nature. So that's where, even for neurodivergent individuals, we found that this approach is working because we're harnessing, we're getting a hold of time, linear time, with these timers, and we call them flow timers.
Yeah.
And all you do is you say, okay, it has a certain nature to it. There's a certain way where the timers have to adjust. And if you do it in the right way, at the right time, in the right context, then it liberates everybody. Whether you're linear, non-linear, it literally brings all the opposites together. And everybody by the end of it likes the timers, because what ends up happening is the context opens up infinity. It's like, whoa, we got a lot more here than we thought was here. Yeah. And then you start to get this like, I want some structure. I want linear time. Bring me back linear time, because we're getting into psychosis land. And it's like, okay, you rein it back in so you can like maintain that infiniteness, and the timers actually hold you there. But now the context of the whole is what makes you appreciate the timers.
Yeah. Yeah. And how long do you set your timers for? Is there is that set in time? Is it yeah.
So this is the magic sauce. The time has to be the whole in the beginning, because justice has to be present in order to imbue the timers with meaning that belongs to each individual in a way that they recognize. That's called fairness. So it's like, oh, I'm an intrinsic part of the whole. I'm important. I get just as much time as everybody else in the room. Oh, there's a big CEO here who's super system relevant, has 1,000 IQ, and can do 5 companies and all this crazy stuff and makes $1 million a minute. And I get the same amount of time as them, and I have 77 IQ and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, because we're not operating by that old system of production. There's a new kind of production. And the ironic thing is that when you're in this new type of time, the productivity goes up for everyone. So as a whole, the system is actually more productive than the linear one that's just grinding out everybody. Because flow state increases productivity by 700%.
Yeah, depending how we measure productivity, because in creativity, there isn't really a measure for productivity in creation. Yeah.
It depends. Now, universal logic might be able to solve that question. But the standards that we produce are just ideas. We're producing ideas, and ideas can be particular, universal, or individual ideas. And as long as we know how to recognize the nature of each one, then we can make a standard that fits nature's own standard. Because nature itself is producing itself from within itself in its notion. So
which all seems very systemic, though, doesn't it?
a non-linear system. There's living systems, and Michael and I had this breakthrough. There's living systems, and then there's dead systems. And the living system is what we're getting in touch with. It is a system, and when you align with it, there's rules and bounds. There is, but the rules and bounds feel boundless when you're in them, because they feel right. It's like, oh, that does actually align with who I really feel like I am. And I have a structured identity. My identity is finite, but I actually feel like I'm infinite right now because I'm in my flow. I'm actually immersed. My identity and the limits of my identity are actually so immersed in reality that I am actually also reality, as well as being this thing, because I'm in some eternal alignment, inner and outer. And that's where you get this paradoxical state that I'm in the world, but not of the world. And you embrace the limit because it's true. It's the best that you can be in that moment. And that's the best that you can do, because we're imperfect perfections. We're perfect imperfections.
Yeah. Perfectly imperfect and imperfectly perfect. But then those living systems need to be able to change. There has to be change possible.
And this is another part of the dyslexic moment, right? It's changing, but it's not changing. Yeah, metaphysical dyslexia. It's changing, but it's not changing. And if you look at it the right way, it makes sense. Essence is the unchanging. If you distill something to its essence, that's the thing that it is for all time. Like, that's the actual thing, not too much, not too little. That's perfectly what the thing is. And in terms of like God's essence, or the nature's essence, even though it's evolving, it's the elements within it don't change anymore. Otherwise, it would change the being entirely. So the essence is what makes the thing persist as what it is. But then there's a surface layer that is changing. So there's like a change. There's an essential change and an unessential change. And between the workings out of those, everything is eternally becoming, but everything is eternally the same. That is true.
Yeah.
So you get that weird thing. Everything is already done and there's nothing to do, but yet nothing is done and there's everything to do. And it's the mixing of those in the right way that creates that spontaneous everything. everything's happening in a beautiful tapestry. Or if you're doing it in the wrong way, then everything is happening in a horrific conflagration of confusion and paradox and, you know, cognitive dissonance, to use your word, right? It's like, it's like, you know, it's all happening, but it's happening as a chaotic mass, a chaos. And the difference between chaos and clarity is just order.
Yeah, but you need chaos to create order. There is chaos in all order.
That's right. That's right. That's the dyslexia of resolving. Is that we actually got to get out of this one or the other thing. It's the wayfulness. You need them both. It's the way that they come together, like Buddha's middle way, Jesus, not the way, the truth, and life. They're all talking about a logic, but not a dead logic that separates male from female. It's a universal logic that makes Sophia known as love, but that knowing is clear. So the masculine and the feminine are not just alternating. Oh, we got the Sophia and we got the knowing. No, they're simultaneously happening the right way by that internal standard of that universal nature of nature that we are already.
Yeah, but they have to happen equally. So we can't have, you know, there is a form of balance there as well, exactly. As in the movement.
Oh, 100%, exactly. And even the oneness, like where they're happening perfectly in balance, also has to be in proportion to their alternating. So they are alternating and they're in the oneness, and then that's in another oneness.
Yeah.
So there's multiple layers, and it's kind of like a cosmic giggle. Once you get into it, it's kind of like playful, it's bouncy, it's like it tricks you, and then you get back into it. That's what the space, a truly alive space, feels like, where the rules and the freedom are all happening in the right way all at once. The timers, the linear time, the eternal time, it's all happening in the right way, and everybody's allowed to be everything, because it's to a degree, because even there's got to be an exclusion to some point. You can't just go around killing everybody in the meeting.
Yeah, but if you are true love, then you won't want to be doing that. You know,
exactly.
So that's an internal measure that requires you to be able to move outside the rules, because rules become restrictive, and you know,
the wrong rules become restrictive.
Yeah.
In some sense, transcending limits is growth. So you have to have a limit that's stable enough to jump into, or else, you know, if you don't have anything stable, then you're just dissolving yourself, and then you don't have any kind of development at all. You're just like a chaotic, you know, diffusion. And that actually, for human beings in our cognition, is really painful when you have that happen.
But you also don't want to create an average, you know, so rules create average behavior, or rules regulate average behavior. That's why we have them. So if we want to go higher, as you say, the ceiling, or we want to expand, we have to be able to move outside those rules. So like in rugby, for example, which is a sport I really love, you have laws, and there are interpretations of those laws, which becomes very difficult if you're playing with a finite thing like a rugby game, which is, you know, start and end, and there's so many, you know, it's a finite thing, so it needs rules. But as soon as I find humans to be infinite beings, because I don't think we have necessarily a beginning or an end. We are consciousness, we are energy, we're all those things that are now inhabiting a physical form in this moment. But we are infinite. So in infinite, the infinite game doesn't have rules, and we have choice, and we decide, you know, we choose to play. So what game we choose to play is a contract, if of such, you know, as to, okay, and at some point sometimes we realize that maybe we didn't really know what contract we were entering, and we then have the choice to revisit that. I think I play with. And that's what makes it so difficult for me to agree to a complete system of too much order, because the order has to be able to become chaotic to evolve.
Yeah, that's the key word there, right? Is too much order. What if you have just the right amount of order? That's the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to get that, because I find that people who understand the limits, like they understand, oh, the system we're in is too much order, like too much wrong order anyway. So in order to try and get outside the system, we go too far in the other direction, and we become the thing that it's ironic, right? It's like we become too unstructured as a overcompensation to the too much structure here. And then we end up in a little bit of chaos that makes people not want to leave their structure, right? They're like, I'm not jumping into that. It's too chaotic. So for instance, it's kind of paradoxical, but you got to see the infinite in the finite. So even for like, human beings are infinite. Yeah. We don't have an end and we don't have a beginning. But at the same time, we do have an end and we do have a beginning, or else we wouldn't know anything about ourselves. So how do you resolve that paradox, that dyslexic kind of moment there? Well, it takes a moment of creativity, a lateral thinking to think, well, to use shape geometry for a second, if you think of a line has ends to it. But if you have an infinite line, technically there's no real ends because it just keeps going, it's endless, but it's linearly endless. So you could say it's technically boundless, kind of, but it has this like separateness. It feels too linear. We want it to feel complete, right? There's something about complete about being truly boundless. So in a way, if you take the ends, those infinite ends, and you bend them around into a circle, then the beginning becomes the end becomes the beginning, but you're still finite. You're still a circle, but now you're genuinely infinite. That's how you're infinite.
And you're going back on yourself, I see what you mean.
Then we have the right proportion of the structure and the chaos, and then the circle can start rotating in a spiral and go somewhere. Like there's a lot of options, and they're happening simultaneously and also alternatingly in a certain way. There's a formal beginning. You can start anywhere on the circle, but as long as you know the context of why you're starting there, then those agreements don't break down in that radical freedom around the circle. And there's an absolute kind of contract we're finding where there's a formal beginning that we can all get to in terms of the fabric of reality itself, which is pure being. If you have the right universal context, then you can make an agreement on what the meaning of pure being is, because we all have that. And then if you derive a system of rules or structure or order off of that origin, the original origin that is already universal, then when we align with it, that's the finite game or the determined game that we want to align with, that becomes that circle that makes us feel boundless in the bounds. And then you can divide that with the whole bunch of formalities as a game. That structure, that universal kind of logic, is what's missing currently. And in order to get people into it, it's kind of going to take some work, because it's really breaking out. It's adding an element of chaos to a rather linear system. So how do you create space to hear that kind of logic speak through your soul? Like, it's already in you, right? You just got to feel safe enough anyway, to engage with that. And that's where the timers come in to say, well, as soon as you start getting into this paradoxical language, if you're abstract on any side, like, if you're male or female or capitalist or socialist or art or science or feeling or thinking or local or global or free will or there's who knows how many dualisms are. You're inviting that into a space, and because nobody seems to understand universal logic, everybody's going to get triggered. Right? Everyone. So it's just like, you got a supercharged space, supercharged. And this is why Michael, so to get back to the original beginning comment of this is why Michael ended up liking the timers counterintuitively, right? Is because it allowed him to be himself a lot. And it triggers this feeling of we're crashing society. The fabric of reality is like, can't keep up. We all have made this contract that the time means this. And because we just divided the time of the whole meeting by the number of participants, everybody got the same amount of what we call block time. And it's a chunk of finite time. But what we're finding is that when you rotate the times, like the speaking turns, in the right order that matches the impulses of the creativity in the individuals, then you start, those blocks of time start to turn into flow state, and you start to experience like timelessness in those block times. So like if everybody gets, the 10 minutes, if there's 6 people in an hour, each person gets 10 minutes. In linear time, it's 10 minutes. But the wakefulness of that time can turn into, it could feel like 5 hours, right, of joy. It could also feel like pain as well. So if you do it the right way.
And do they choose when they speak? Is it a flow state for them, or is it, okay, you are next up, therefore you need to now participate?
Now, this is the magic sauce. This is why I think we have something that's never been seen in the world before. In terms of content, you can sometimes get flow, but in terms of form, that's the thing that's been missing. We've figured out how to rotate the form with the content, so they're in a dialectic happening simultaneously too. So that no matter what your feeling needs to change, it follows you. So if the topic needs to change, the topic needs to, it's boring now. We need to do something, or we're within a confine. We get outside our echo chamber. You can do that, right? Oh, let's change topic. But changing form is not very well understood. What the heck really is form and all this? So we found out that form really is just a logic again. It's an origin and an order. And there's 12 types we found out that you can get people to vote on terms of how they're feeling. The most stable, kind of boring one, if you need a lot of order, like if you're getting a lot of chaos, like, there's free flow. It's like, we have lots of energy here. And you want to, go to the other side of the dialectic and balance it. And everybody feels that, right? They get to vote with these special timers, these flow timer voting buttons.
Yeah.
They get to vote on their form, content, and people, and they can vote on the most stable form, the first form. And the first form is called we call it straight time or straight order.
Yeah.
Where the order is predetermined before the meeting, or whoever comes in, it's just just holds that order.
Yeah.
And then it's the same person as the origin each time. And then it's boring and boring and boringer if you don't change it up after a while. But in a chaotic element, it adds a lot of structure. And okay, they know what's going to happen. And they know who's going to talk next. But if you want to adding degrees of chaos, the other kinds come in. So everything divine and divine logic operates in threes, trinities. And that's kind of like, that's another restriction. But if you think of trinities the right way, they actually are infinite because they're circles.
Yeah.
So if you don't want so much structure, but you don't want the chaos again, then in the first third, those are all the term-based ones. So there's 3 term-based ones. There's the straight time, and there's an intermediary where it's like popcorn, or there's directive time, where you have the same origin, but the person gets to choose the next person. So there's a little bit more a little bit more freedom, but it's still structured, and you still can't quite predict it. And then the third type of turn-based is popcorn, where it's like you're just who goes next. You can't really predict it, but it's turn-based.
Yeah.
And then to add in more chaos, then you can go to free flow. And free flow has 3 types. And then the timers count down with 3 types of free flow, where you're still tracking the timers, but it's like people can cut each other off. There's no turns. You can be rude, you can do whatever. And whoever's talking will just run their timers. And so the time still runs down. And there's a third mode called God mode. And God mode is this weird mode where you can imbue people with the authority of the moment. So you can say, whatever this person says, for this period of time, we're just going to do everything that they want. They can make you talk. They can donate time. They can switch times. They can do topics. They can change everything. And then people just do that.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 forms, or those are the 12 forms technically.
Yeah.
And there might be more degradations, but that's how we've regimented in a way degrees of chaos and order. So that if it gets boring, you can change up how you're talking about it, not just what you're talking about. You can change how you're talking about it.
Yeah.
And then you can change the people that you're talking with. So all 3 of those things are rotating. And then you start to get this feeling like the meeting is ever living. It's it's never getting rigid and boring. It's always fluxing in the right way. And that starts to create flow in all 3 of those categories. And we did that in 220 meetings. Whoa. He's feeling restricted, but in the right way, not the system relevant way. This is a new kind of restriction that's non-linear. Yeah. And that's where we started to realize this is going to work for everyone. That's when we started getting excited. It's because I think we finally found the wisdom and how to bring human beings together who are seeking it.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is very interesting because it is a dialogical process, really, with a varying degrees of order, as you say. Which I obviously immediately want to go to the most chaos first and see, because people structure themselves in a way they create their own order if you create agreement between those that are involved in it.
And that's why inside the meetings there's cycles. So we call them universal cycles because everybody gets the same block time, but in each cycle everybody gets a turn or a chance to express every single cycle. And if everybody could come in and they could be super coherent with each other and say, hey, we're all feelers, we all feel great. Pure free flow, the whole meeting, all 60 minutes, and then they'll make it work. They'll just intuitive, they make it work. And then you get the real structured analytical types, which are like, hey, we want it turn-based, and we want the turns to be fair, but everybody gets a chance in the turn. And then even with the free flow, we still keep track of the block time, so that even after the free flow, everybody at the end has said the same amount of time, like expressed the same amount. Or if they don't feel like expressing, they can donate their time to other people, and that still reflects their agency.
Yeah.
So even the introverts can be like, oh, they'll still feel powerful in the meeting.
Yeah.
So this is where it's like, holy crap, like we got something here that is really universal. It works for all the opposites, and it allows them to bring their authenticity into the moment and that spontaneity to say, I'm feeling this way now. And then at the end of the cycle, they vote to say, what do I want the next cycle to be? Now that I've gotten a turn like everybody else, what do we all feel like doing now? And then they do a really quick vote on their timer. They click, okay, form, drops down the 3 forms. Okay, I want to do this. And they drop down the content is also organized in terms of 3s of scope, like individual scope, group scope, and then world scope.
Yeah.
And then people are also organized in terms of sort of like their wisdom scopes. Or we're still figuring that one out. But we know the first 2 are working really, really well. And I feel like, once they vote, and then the software aggregates the votes, then it's just the spontaneous outcome of bringing them together that determines what the meeting will be next.
Yeah.
And if you don't get what you want 3 times in a row, and it's like mob rule, it's like we have a group of people and you're like the outlier, you never get what you want. There's a veto process to even balance that, where it's like if you don't get what you want 3 times in a row, then you can veto the majority and get what you want. And then that person's even happy. And then we're like, wow, we really have unlocked the puzzle pieces here. And it's like for everything, boardroom meetings, playgrounds, playing, I don't know, any kind of board game. It's like family conversations. It works everywhere because those are universal determinations. That's why it's a universal logic.
Because you're focusing on being heard, because that I think is our biggest desire. Our expression comes through from us feeling that we are being heard or being seen. And you touch on a lot of those. I'm very curious and very excited to be watching what comes from it, and I would love to come and have a look. We're just kind of running out of our time in the moment, but so
linear time.
Linear time.
Exactly. I think we achieved some destiny time though, a little smidgen there. So
exactly, definitely, and I hope we can do it again. I mean, I would love to take these conversations a little bit further. Because clock time is very restrictive at the best of times. So I'm gonna finish it off with a tricky question. And what makes it tricky is that it is such a big question. So to answer maybe in short, and we can revisit it again. But what world do you dream if you were being heard? What does that world look like?
That world looks like a new world spirit that is an inner kind of governance, internally and externally, that generates flow states in a deep and profound, fulfilling way for everybody. No matter what the particular form is, as long as it's done in that wayfulness of a universal kind, a universal logic that's also feeling, then I feel like all of our institutions, anything that we do as a species, will continue to grow in that harmonious way. Even though we're challenging our limits and we're making new rules, that process itself will become a sort of blessedness. And for me, that's what I really feel like we have the chance to create, even while the world is in a challenging place, through meetings like this, beautiful meetings and moments in time that feel eternal like this. So I feel like, and what's your wisdom, I should ask you? I feel like that's the kind of wisdom we need.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I think it all comes from inside. We are creative collaborative beings, and we are able to regulate our own worlds. We need to find spaces which are sacred and safe, where we can reconnect with that inner wisdom, because we have been disconnected in this illusion of separation, which is an illusion. So for us to connect through, even if it's through screens, at the moment, we are still all connected, and uniquely one of ones. So Mark, I thank you deeply and gratefully.
My pleasure.